Hi there. In this video, we're going to be talking about using the triangle congruence theorems. So we can say that triangles are congruent based off of a couple of things, okay? The first one that we can say is the side-side-side congruency theorem, okay? We can then say that the angle-angle-side congruency theorem will give us congruent triangles. We can say that side angle side gives us congruent triangles. We can say that angle side angle gives us congruent triangles. And then we can say that the hypotenuse leg congruency theorem also gives us congruent triangles, okay? So based on this, all right, just given any of this information for two triangles, we can conclude that two triangles are congruent, okay? Now, if I were given, and I'm just going to use side angle side, so let me draw a picture of the side angle side congruency theorem. All right, so I've drawn two triangles here. I've got triangle ABC and I've got triangle DEF, okay? So now, if I wanted to show, I'm going to use side angle side to show that these two are congruent, all right? So let's say that AB is congruent to DE. Let's say that angle B is congruent to angle E, and then let's say that BC is congruent to EF. All right, so what I can conclude from this, given side angle side, I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Now, I'm going to go back to what we initially talked about when we talked about congruent triangles. If two triangles are congruent, then all corresponding parts are congruent. All right, so I wrote that out, okay? So if two triangles are congruent, then their corresponding parts are congruent. So what we can say here, let's list out what we know. All right, we were given that AB is congruent to DE. All right, I can then say that BC is congruent to EF. Now, the next thing that I can say is that AC is congruent to DF. That's what this says down here. If two triangles are congruent, then their corresponding parts are congruent. So we can then jump in here and say that AC is congruent to DF. All right. Now, the other thing that I knew was that, so that was our sides. Let's talk about our angles. So we knew that angle B is congruent to angle E. All right. That's what we were given. Based on the fact that these two triangles are congruent, I can jump in here and say that angle A is congruent to angle D. So angle A is congruent to angle D. I can then say that angle C is congruent to angle F. All right. So what I can do is just purely based off of me going, all right, these two triangles are congruent by using side angle side. Or any of these triangle congruency theorems, I can make this statement here, that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. I can then jump in and say that any corresponding part of that triangle is going to be congruent. We call this the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, also known as, all right, and let's write that out. All right, let's write this thing out. So the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, and that's how that works. Now remember that when I named all of this, okay, notice how when this was named, how A corresponds with D. All right, and notice how those angles are congruent. Notice how then if I come in here and write that B is congruent to B and E correspond with each other because of how it's named, how these angles are congruent. Notice how then that C and F are named last and those angles are congruent. All right, so how we name it allows us to know what are the corresponding parts, okay? And that's really important. So let's look at one proof on this. Okay, in this proof, let's take a look at the picture. So we've got two triangles here, all right? You're given that DF is congruent to SR. You're given that FE is congruent to RT. And then you're given that angle F is congruent to angle R, all right? And you want to prove that angle D is congruent to angle S. All right, so this is a little weird, all right? So let's go through and let's talk about this triangle here real quick, all right? So what I know is this. Let's label that DF is congruent to SR, all right? Those I'm going to use one tick mark. FE is going to be congruent to RT. That has two tick marks. Then I'm going to come in here and say that angle F is congruent to angle R. That's going to have one arc mark for each. Now, from this, I know that these are going to be congruent. So triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. Then I know that all the corresponding parts are going to be congruent. So I can jump in here and say that DE is going to be congruent to ST. I know that angle D is going to be congruent to angle S. All right, and then I know that angle E is going to be congruent to angle T. And that's because of the corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, so that's from, all right, and so CPCTC. And so from that, what I then know is that angle D is congruent to angle S, all right? And so I'm able to make everything in green. I'm able to draw all those conclusions by using CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay, so let's write out this proof in a formal sense. Okay, so I wrote out our statements and our reasons for our three given statements, okay? So from here, all right, and that was all the stuff that we did in red. Now, based on that, we had side, angle, side. Side, angle, side. So what we can now conclude is that in step 4 is that triangle, and we'll call this DEF, is going to be congruent to triangle. All right, so D, E, F. So I'm going to, if I start with D, E, and F, I got to go S, T, R. 2 arc marks, 3 arc marks, 1 arc mark. That's how I named that. All right, so 2, 3, 1. So that's going to be congruent to triangle STR. All right, and the reason for that on step 4 is because that's side, angle, side congruency theorem. All right, so then what I can say in step 5 is now that angle D is congruent to angle S. And the reason that I can make that statement is because of corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, also known as CPCTC, also known as okay. And so that's what I'm doing. So if we can identify that two triangles are congruent, their corresponding parts are congruent, and we can prove anything else here. So hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thanks a lot. Bye.